Well, friends, welcome to this special book launch event with Connelly Gilliam. And if you're watching on a live stream, hi to you as well. It's always ups the ante a little bit when you know this is on the www.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Tiny
right.
bit, but it's fine. We're feeling very relaxed, and it's going to be great.
For each, when there's time for applause, do really loud, so it sounds like there's hundreds, if not thousands.
And so if you don't know Connally is no stranger to Regent College. She's graduated with an MA in Theological Studies here, and she is on our board of governors, which means she sits with a group of important, insightful, intelligent, wise people to help govern and oversee the college. And Connally, we really appreciate you. And I have read this book. I'm not even pretending like I've read it. I have actually read it, and it is an excellent book. So the book is called And Yet Undaunted. But let me tell you a little bit more about Connally as well, just so you have a bit more of a sense of the other sorts of things she does other than what she does at Regent College. She also serves with the US Navigators and is the author of a book called Revelations of a Single Woman, Living the Life I Didn't Expect. And she's a frequent speaker on sexuality, gender, race, and the unremitting goodness of God found in Jesus Christ. She lives in Virginia, in Charlottesville. She has nephews and nieces and is a godmother to 5. So she knows what she's talking about. She has lived a life that has seen lots of twists and turns, different zigs and zags. And so that is kind of the basis of part of this book. So she's going to tell you a little bit about the book and kind of how it came to be. But I'm going to read the beginning of it so you sort of get a sense of what the book's about. So it's called And Yet Undaunted, Embraced by the Goodness of God in the Chaos of Life. And it's written by Connelly Gilliam and her friend Paula Rinehart. So they've done this together, and their stories are kind of woven throughout it. So let me begin by reading the initial part of the book, and then Connelly will hand over to you. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
Okay. You ready? Once upon a time, there was a garden, a world filled with flawless beauty and goodness, where all was right and good and whole. We can still see so many reminders of that original goodness. Grandchildren playing in the front yard, pink azaleas springing to life, dinner with friends where the laughter is even better than the food, trips to places that you thought you'd never get to visit, bike rides through beautiful green hills, faraway places where God is doing incredible things. If there's so much goodness to be had now, how wonderful must the original world have been? The world God created that he himself said was very good indeed. But that goodness has been tainted. There's a worm in the apple now. Life has taken a chunk out of our side. We have all had hard things in our stories, twists and turns and sudden drops. Something's not right, really not right. It appears for all the world that God has withheld the one thing we really want. If only what's missing could suddenly be ours, we could loosen our tense muscles, let out the breath we've been holding, a great exhale. Life would be complete. We would find ourselves looking over the wall into that garden with a hidden angst, longing for what can never be ours again. A dark voice whispers the same old questions. Really? Can you trust what God has said? What he's doing in your life? I mean, look at the mess around you. Does God have your best interests at heart? Is God good? Is he really good? Living life well, smiling at the future, boils down to how we answer that question. In the face of a world that will, indeed can, take a chunk out of your hide, is God good, and can we trust him? So as Paula and Connally walk through the arc of their stories in this book, you'll see bits and pieces of your own. Stories that aren't anything special, in fact, they're just ordinary human stuff. But to answer this question of God's goodness, we all need to look our stories square in the face, to sit before the beauty of this great narrative that we call the gospel and discover that our stories are part of something so much bigger. As you join us, that's them, we think you'll discover how the beautiful reality of God's goodness trickles down to the gritty places of your own life. And we believe in this truth. In your journey into God's goodness, you will find a bedrock sense of peace and a way to smile at the future. That's just page 2 and 3. And so, Connally, can you tell us a little bit about why did you write this book? And then give us a little bit of a sense of kind of the shape of the book and what is it about? And then we'll get you to read some more parts of it.
Okay. So I'm going to actually reverse that in terms of the shape of the book, because explaining the shape is quite simple in a Regent context. In essence, we have formed this book in alignment with the big gospel story of creation, fall, redemption, restoration, or as a guy, Mike Metzger, says, how life ought to be, how it is, how it can be in Christ, and how it will be. And we've mapped out, in essence, the big gospel story, as we refer to it, because we really believe that laying hold of, if you will, all 4 chapters is integral to being able to lay hold of the goodness of God. Because there's something about being able to map our lives against the big story or in alignment with the big story that helps us actually to discover something of the goodness of who God is. Specifically, for example, with creation, if we don't get the ought piece of life right, there's a lot of implications for that, but one of them is that secretly, when we are alone, we doubt that there's a good God who actually designed us for good gifts as an extension of his good heart towards his beloved image bearers. So there's something about getting that piece right. And then with the fall, if we want to look over or look beyond the fall, perhaps it's uncomfortable, we don't like language around sin, the language of sin feels like judgy or hatey, we actually end up losing the capacity to call reality reality. And what we want to do is help the reader be able to name courageously reality in the world around them, but also in their hearts. If you, or if we don't quite lay hold of redemption, we short circuit the process of being able to have the, if you will, the confidence that comes from the one and done piece of Jesus' work on the cross. But we also lose the gift of being able to walk in the increasing one day at a time goodness of the presence of God, even in the chaos of our moment. And lastly, and we'll talk a little bit about this more later, if the reality of what will be in the restoration is elusive at best or unimportant to us, we actually lose out on the opportunity that is ours to gain hope from what will be and tease that back into the now of our lives. So that's really our hope with this book, is that the reader will be set free to grab onto the fullness of the goodness of God's big story. I've said to Paula before, it's interesting because I actually came to the discovery that the sin thing was real, because I was raised in a world that technically needed the sin component for our gospel to make sense, but we didn't ever actually talk about it. We're basically nice people. And
Southerners.
We were Southerners. We're
I'm
Southerners.
a Southerner too.
Yes,
Yeah.
You're a Southerner. You're deep. You're from the deep South.
I know, very deep South. Sorry.
So for me, it was the goodness of actually being able to just name the ugly, right? Not just out there, but also in here, the part that's not nice. And for me, ultimately, learning about, and learning sounds like an intellectual exercise, I mean being able to apprehend, grab hold on, and absorb something of the reality of what will be, to the point where it actually carries emotional weight. So that, I would say to Paula, those were my two pieces. And hers were really more discovering something about the garden and the goodness of God's intent. That her longing, as she puts it, to have a Thanksgiving dinner with nobody kicking one another under the table is actually in alignment with God's longing. And for her, discovering the reality of redemption when she was right at the end of her teen years changed everything, everything for her. So, but we've talked about how if your faith is carried in a frame that's missing one or two or three of those sides, when life shakes you up, your faith tends to fall out. And so our hope is that by enabling people to get a hold of the large story, or to use a different metaphor, all four sides of the frame, we're actually empowering people to stand in the goodness of who God is, kind of regardless ultimately of circumstance. So that's a bit of the general frame and the why behind the general frame of the book. The why the book, to begin with, is, I think it was about 5 years ago, we went to speak, Paula and I went to speak. She was invited, and then she asked me to come along. She's published a number of books. She asked me to come along to Riga, Latvia. And we spoke to a group in Latvia that was probably 200 women from across the spectrum within Christianity, from Assemblies of God all the way to Catholic and everything in between. And this is a group of people, of women in Riga, and really Latvia on the whole, who've been run over a lot. Run over by the Russians, run over by the Germans, and then sort of back and forth. And there were a lot of faces that you could look out and tell, we better have something of substance, because this was not going to be an easy sell, right? These were women who knew something about suffering, individually and collectively. And what we were going to say better make true sense in the places that matter inside the hearts of people. So we spoke in Latvia, and God did something. Like, it actually, there was something that emerged that amazed us. There was an energy and a life and groups of people praying and worshiping that emerged. And afterwards, we were like, whoa, maybe there's some there in what we're doing. And so we began working on writing this book slowly. Paula is 68. So 14 years my senior. She's married, she's a therapist, she's a grandmother. So she's lived a different life than my life at 54, and still single, sort of different world. But both of our lives have felt incredibly full, and neither of us particularly wanted to write a book. You know, just another book. It's a lot of work. And then you have to actually launch your book and promote your book and do social media and these kind of things, none of which we're into. But there was this deeper sense of, yes, do the book. And I was saying this recently, that Paula's and my joke is, and we really do mean this as a joke, but that after the 3-year process of writing the book, we came away convinced we really were Christians. And I do say it as a joke, obviously, but there's a sense in which, maybe in a way, a lot of us always are sort of circling ever deeper into our convincedness, if that's a word. And that's how we've come out with the book. There's a culture that's in the States. I don't know if it's as much in Canada, because we're sort of on different trajectories around faith as cultures as a whole, but all headed in the same direction towards deeper secularization. But there's a culture that's emerging in the States right now, which I would say is where doubt is really increasingly celebrated. I don't mean with lights and cameras and action, but I mean just doubt is increasingly nibbling at people's heels and in a way, bending towards that pack of dogs that's nibbling at the heels of people's faith is almost seen increasingly as the courageous thing to do. Like it's more courageous to throw over what's been inherited than to wrestle it down and figure out what it means for the now. And so it's really into this context that we write this book, which is saying, look, there's a lot of things we do not have answers to. There's a lot of questions that are raised in our culture we don't really quite know how to navigate. But we do believe that the good news of Jesus Christ is actually good news. And that the reality of creation, fall, redemption, restoration actually contains and is far grand and big enough to contain our stories plus some, of course. And we spoke at a retreat 2 weekends ago in Montreat, North Carolina, to about 150 women. And Paula got up and she said, I'm 68, I've been walking this faith journey for 50 years, and I can tell you, I still believe it, and it is more real and better news now than it was before. And she said afterwards to me, I probably could have sat down after that. And I said, yeah, almost you could have, because there's that simplicity in what we're offering. So that gives a little bit of an overview and a little bit of the structure and a little bit of the why.
Yeah. And so the book kind of deals quite really honestly and vulnerably and openly with both of your stories, and kind of this kind of where life's kind of gone off script a little bit, where you thought there was a script and it's kind of not kind of gone how you thought it would, or things happen. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you've seen that? So it deals with some of the things around racism or alcoholism or relationship with parents that haven't been perhaps as we would want it to be, unexpected singleness, all sorts of different things. Do you want to tell us sort of your parts of your story that are woven in there, and how you've sort of interacted with that, and how you've sort of those have fleshed themselves out in the book? So just tell us more about your stories that you confront as you write the book.
Well, this is sort of a macabre way into that, but when we're preparing for the marketing of the book, the publishers now don't really do much to market it, but they give you great coaching. And one of the things that they wanted us to do was to create a basket, right? A gift basket for the people who turned in their receipts for early purchases of the book. And into this gift basket, we're supposed to go key metaphors or images from the book. And Paula and I sort of laughed. We're like, what are we going to stick in this book? Because we talk about Paula's mother's late age adult onset alcoholism. Paula's like, we could get one of those little teeny bottles from the airplane, and we could stick it in. And I was like, well, and I have the unintentional singleness part. I was like, we could get like a bride and groom from the top of a cake and snap it in two, and we were just sort of joking about the things that we could stick.
It's going to be a great basket.
Right. Because we were just saying, we were just laughing that the marketing is built around this sort of raw sense. And that this book, while we believe it's deeply optimistic, that's an optimism that comes from Jesus Christ, not because everything's coming up roses and daffodils. And so anyhow, this book, it does sort of weave our stories. There's aspects of loss from early death and my family, singleness piece, the discovery of my latent racism, really from a 3-year living situation with one of my friends who's African American, and where we circled ever more deeper into one another until sort of truth started to bubble out of both of us. And Paula has a struggle with her mom's alcoholism and her son's infertility. So these are real life things that just, in a sense, all of us have our own panoply, our own selection of real life things. And the belief being that, again, God's goodness and his big story are real and strong and right and true and good enough to contain it. So
Do you want to read some of it?
Well, okay. We actually planned this already before.
It was so spontaneous. Didn't that look so spontaneous?
spontaneous.
Hey, do you want to read that section?
Well, how about this place? It's marked with the paperclip. Yeah. So we went back and forth about what to read, and it's part of the book. It's taking you through a journey, but it's a parallel journey with the emotional realities that go along with creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And it's trying to trace implicitly in the book, not just, if you will, a robust theology applied to daily life, but a robust theology applied to our interior spaces as well. And so we decided actually we would do a short reading from the second to last chapter, which is in my voice. And it's called How Hope Plays Backwards, Little Tastes of Goodness Leave You Hungry for More. And some of this will be familiar to you. I've spoken here at Regent for chapel. They're excited. And I've spoken at Regent for chapel, and I know a number of you just as friends and as people. But I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. You can sit back. You can relax, you can pretend like it's story time at school. And I think what you'll capture in this is really how the reality of what will be has come to actually mean something in my life in light of my story. So this is chapter 8, How Hope Plays Backwards. I'm sitting on a little wooden folding chair at an outdoor wedding. It's 78 degrees. Beautiful lilting breezes, pale blue sky, dimming horizon, bugless. Really, this day is all that you might hope for in a central Virginia outdoor wedding at the end of May. Gorgeous people, gorgeous setting. And with the exception of a gaggle of 20-something single women sitting on the other side of the aisle, everyone around me seems to be paired with a significant other or laughing with their children. As I listen to the minister preach about the unique joys of marriage, I watch heads toss back in laughter and nod with knowing smiles. And it starts to gnaw in me. How have I, for 50 years, or at least 25, managed to miss being part of the story that everyone seated in these folding chairs is celebrating? Glorious youth, leaving and cleaving. Amid all that sumptuous beauty, a familiar ache creeps in. Connally, you are not in the story. You don't have a place in the story that people have celebrated in culture after culture, context after context, for time immemorial. This thought does not feel good. But 15 years of the practice of looking for Jesus amid such feelings reminds me that this is a moment to ask for help. So I resist the pull into some emotional black hole. I silently cry out a rather simple help. What emerges would not classify as vision in any medieval mystic sense. Still, I look up past the minister to a barn set in the distant, lush green hills. And I can see in my heart's imagination the presence of Jesus, big as that statue of him in Rio de Janeiro. It's as if he's saying, Connally, you are in the story. You are in the very, very big story of which this moment, this wedding, this couple is simply an icon, an image. This story is vast, eternal, and real, as is my love for you. Gaze on that couple up front and know that like that groom is loving his bride, I am loving my people. There are no mighty peals of thunder, no voices of a great multitude. Actually, the only sounds I hear are those of the duet singers. But for one moment, I really inhabit the words in the book of Revelation, that history is headed somewhere, to the marriage supper of Jesus and his bride, his people, to a time when all things are made new. And for one moment, As human wedding singers sing, I am there, seen, known, cherished, the beloved bride. It's not an abstract concept. It's reality, and somehow the eyes of my heart can see. Something in me exhales. My heart rate slows, my chin lifts slightly, my brow unfurrows. Quietly I sigh and look around me. The early evening sky is still pale blue. Breezes still lilt around me. Men still have their arms around wives and girlfriends. The pastor is still speaking about marriage and its glories. And in the distance, the barn is still a barn, with no actual 25-foot statue of Jesus standing above it. But for one brief moment, I have been reminded, and in turn rehearted, if such a word exists. God is, He loves me, and I, along with so many others from all tribes and peoples, am in the big story that really is headed somewhere. Something really did shift in me that day. It was more than a moment of reminding. These words from Jesus really brought a heart shift. As the wedding spilled into drinks in the Magnolia Garden and a dinner under a tent, I found myself wanting to celebrate the marriages that were around me. Frankly, it was surreal. How could I, who 60 minutes earlier was tilting on the precipice of storyless non-being, now find myself sitting at a round table talking with a 40-year-old stay-at-home mother of 4 about the beauty of her marriage? How were authentic words about her husband and her embodying Jesus Christ and his radiant love for his people coming from my lips? How was it that hope from the big eternal story was dancing inside of me at that moment? When what can be is not enough. Growing up, I never had much use for pondering how things would be at the end of time, mine or anyone else's. My faith had more or less centered on our human, God-shaped whole and Jesus' supernatural and very helpful capacity to fill it. I was very content with what could be in this life. Talking about eternity begged questions about future life and death, heaven and hell, and other socially awkward, seemingly ethereal concepts. So a quietly emergent don't ask, don't tell approach to the far bigger picture had left me with an unarticulated me plus God equals my best life now theology, which seemed to be enough until it wasn't. A few years after my book on unintentional singleness came out, I was feeling burned out from all the travel and speaking. My organization granted me a sabbatical. A few months before it was to begin, my 2-year-old nephew, Jude, drowned in my parents' pool. He was held alive by machines for 1 week, and that 1 week in pediatric ICU taught me that though we are designed by God to flourish in this world, sometimes, in shocking ways, it fails to happen. Even when care is excellent, faith is great, and the burden of prayer is carried around the world, life on this planet can be simply nipped in the bud. When I'd gotten the news, a phone call telling me that Jude had drowned and to come home now, I couldn't breathe. And stunned, I crumpled. I called dear friends who graciously and despite my protests met me at my house, packed up my bags, and drove me the 2+ hours to my hometown of Charlottesville. When I walked into the kitchen, I was met by a host of women, my mom's friends, organizing food and manning the phone, and there were family members hugging, struggling in teary uncertainty. Even now, as I write this, I can feel the staggering weight of it all. All that transpired with Jude confronted me with death, something that I, who still longed to create a Sound of Music life, had never faced so starkly. Death, particularly of a child, slaps you out of any illusions of invincibility. It sends your heart, soul, and mind spinning. Really, it blows up the universe, or makes you want to blow it up. Gratefully, my organization got this. They extended my sabbatical, freeing up my time for lots and lots of counseling and healing prayer, and not a little painting, to help me find my feet again. And over time I did. Here, though, is where I need to introduce you to Tommy 4, as he'd been nicknamed by some family members. My older brother and sister-in-law's eldest son, the namesake of his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. Tommy was my first nephew, and I was just flat out crazy about him. I enjoyed just being with this tall, lanky, lovable boy. Since he was a baby, his winsome smile had come so easily. 3 years after Jude drowned, this beloved 19-year-old slipped off a roof, fell 4 stories, and died. There was no alcohol or drugs involved, just fun-loving college student stargazing gone crushingly awry. Had I been college-age myself, I probably would have been up on the rooftop too. When I got the call about Tommy, just as with Jude, I collapsed. But then I looked up at God and I told him directly, no, not again. We will not have this in our family again. No. But my defiant no had proved a weak little protest in the face of the facts. And once again, just as with Jude, dear friends packed up my bags and drove me to Charlottesville. About 4 months after Tommy fell, my parents and I were sitting on the white sands of Virginia Beach, our bodies splotchy red from uneven sunning. I watched as the beachgoers began winding down for the day. From our low-slung seats, our heels and toes toyed with the sand, and one of us opened the mini igloo cooler. 1 raspberry soda was left. Let's toast Tommy 4, I suggested. Let's declare his great points, the things we love. So as we sat in our little sandy circle, each of us made a declaration, lifted the can, took a sip, then passed it. His big smile and twinkly eyes, his capacity to bridge gaps between so many kinds of people, his tall, lumbering, gangly self, his confidence, the way he'd take both my hands in his and lightly play with them. And then my mother's eyes began watering. My heart clutched in my chest even as I could hear my father try to suck back sniffles. There we sat, toes working sand, shoulders shaking up and down, lips quivering. Each of us now lost in our own thoughts of this first grandson, whose gripless docksiders had slipped off the black-iced roof. If Jude's shocking death taught me about life ending, the sudden loss of Tommy 4 did something more. It catapulted me into questions of eternity that had just not mattered before. I began scouring the scriptures for words about death, resurrection, heaven, hell. I picked up books and read and talked to people, and slowly I began to suspect this is real. I mean, I'd always thought words about new heavens and a new earth to come were technically true, but that had been in an abstract way, like how you might know the names of presidents, or the periodic table, or the quadratic formula. I accepted eternity as an idea, part of a spiritual equation that had little to do with real life experience. When Jude died, his father told me that it was as if his arm had been ripped off his body and sent straight up to heaven. That, my brother said, turned his attention to a place he might have previously ignored. When Tommy 4 died, his father's voice was snatched from him for a very long time. Grief can do that. For me, these 2 staggering losses, plus that ongoing backdrop of missing marriage, in a sense, forced my face into the mud. But instead of suffocating in the mix, I found myself slowly pushed through, helped by deep, repeated dives into counseling and prayer, into a different place. Up I came, spitting dirt and twigs out of my mouth, wiping clear my eyes over the course of about 5 years. I began to see that my little life on this planet was a small, albeit important and much loved, piece in a far greater story. Accompanying me in that discovery was the book of Job in the Old Testament, one of the most well-known explorations of suffering in Scripture. Job, the protagonist, loses his family, his wealth, and his health, all with God's knowledge and permission. My friend Michael suggested one time that, as with Job, the things that I had feared and dreaded had in fact come upon me. He encouraged me to dwell deeply with this man who had suffered so greatly. And as I read the last chapters of Job again and again and again, my heart began to know in a way that felt almost three-dimensional in its solidity. Yes, Job is right. There really is a God of angels and stars, all of whom sang together before Jude or Tommy or I entered this planet. Breath came back to me slowly over time as I began to realize there really is a God who contains the power of the seas, including the waves of emotion that have been crashing over me for months upon months upon months. There really is a God who knows the gates of death and the depths of darkness, including that which I and so many of my family members have fallen into. And I saw that though the world, the flesh, and the devil still work their sorcery, God is and was and always shall be in control. In a way deeper than ever before, I found myself saying with Job to God, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. In the midst of my wrestling with Scripture, the ideas of death and resurrection began to gain new traction inside of me. Jude died, Tommy died. But what if I really was going to see them again? What if the angel who had declared centuries before to the two grieving women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He's not here, for he has risen, as he said." What if the angel was actually right? What if the dead, like Jesus, could rise? And what if the Apostle Paul was right when he spoke of Jesus one day returning to raise all those who were in him into a new, tangible, bodily life? A new life lived on a new earth, set in a new heavens. What if, because of Jesus, death really was dead once and for all? And what if a new landscape of relationships and work and worship was actually opening up? Jesus promised the thief who was about to die that he would be with him in paradise. What if Jude, who slipped into the pool, and Tommy, who slipped off the roof, had in fact slipped into paradise? Maybe this current life was not, nor was it intended to be, the bottom line, the end of the story. Maybe the story was bigger. I think we'll go ahead and stop there with this section.
Yeah. Thanks, Connally. You were saying that part was the easiest part for you to write, the fall part and the restoration part.
Yes.
It doesn't sound like the easiest part to write. So there's something that's happened in the redemption part that's enabled you to do that. Can you talk? Is there like what's been helpful you in the sense that the redemption part is now, and yet that is, there is the vision of that coming. But what is it that's helped you in the now, in the redemption kind of part of the story, the grand narrative, and the redemption part of your own story, even though that's been the hard part for you to write in the book? Can you talk to us a little bit about that process for you?
Yes, it's interesting. Actually, for all the reasons that you just heard kind of embedded in what I've written, the restoration part is actually the piece, I think, where the gospel went from being something which would supercharge or fill me on some level to that which is actually big enough to call me out, ultimately regardless of context or circumstance. But Claire is right that it has been, of course, a messy journey, and the journey of apprehending or absorbing the reality of the redemption that I believe has been probably this slow, granular, daily journey of well, I haven't had daily counseling for my whole life, but a daily journey shaped, as I said, by things like counseling and healing prayer and working on integrating my right brain with my left brain and discovering how repair can happen in areas of life that have been ruptured. But I think it's been this journey of learning to live with this knowledge that there is a one and done quality to the gospel, this sort of settled thing that Jesus works and makes possible, this settled eternal thing that starts now that he makes possible, but this very daily, one day at a time apprehension or absorption of what does it actually mean that this is true? I mean, I don't know about you all in your own lives or in your kids' lives, your spouse's lives, or the people you work with live, but it's kind of a tough thing sometimes to actually take belief and experienced it teased down so that it actually flows into the nooks and crannies of our interior space, and it actually marinates our very bones. I mean, the things that have enabled that, Claire, to actually answer your question have probably been all the, in a sense, very predictable, normal things. Real people to talk honestly with, people who will pray repeatedly, practicing the risk of telling the truth, discovering that God's scrub brush of sort of loving Holy Spirit activity is deep enough to get into the deep reaches and the wells of our soul where lies have been inscripted, and he's actually powerful enough, like the blood of Jesus actually can get down in those places in our interior world. So it's been that slow journey of deep personal work and then community, always set within this context of learning to worship more, I think. I don't know, that's sort of a vague, rambling answer.
No, it's good, it's helpful. I'm going to leave it, there's some space there for people to, if you've got questions or thoughts that you want to share. So that this kind of process of redemption, the way they talk about it in the book, is this idea of redemption in the interior spaces and then redemption in the presence of others. So in my role as Assistant Dean of Students, I love that in the sense that there's this thing of the doing life together is part of the redemptive process. I was interested by something that you said, and a couple of people in this room come up, not covertly, as you're talking about your need for relationship with men in the kind of redemptive process of being kind of single. And so can you talk just a little bit about that part? Some of those people are in the room that you kind of covertly talk about.
Yes. So one of the things that's interesting, because I've gotten not necessarily pushback, but people sort of whispering, like, I can't believe you said that in the book, is I've talked about as being a woman who's single, needing the strength of good men in my life. And that it's not that women don't have strength. Women do have strength, but you can hear embedded in what I'm saying, which is now intrinsically controversial, that I'm saying there's something that's good male strength that's actually a different thing than good female strength. And one of, I think, the struggles that was trying to wrestle through with the singleness, especially if you don't live near like an extended family where you have uncles or brothers or cousins or something around, which most people I know don't actually, is where does one go as a single woman to receive good male strength? And then how do you get it once you're there? Because there's so much gender and sexual sort of chaos in our culture, being able to say, I actually am a woman, but I'm actually not a man. And there's actually goodness men bring that all my best girlfriends over the very best glass of wine on the very most fun Friday night possible, we don't actually have among us, as great as we are. And
really great.
And so part of what I talk about in the section on redemption is that apprehending the goodness of the gospel oftentimes begins with taking a risk of expressing need. It actually, it means sometimes expressing need that comes with some amount of shame, whether it's personal shame or cultural shame. And my experience is, I don't have like a Bible passage to quote, but my experience is that God is like a lover who cannot resist the humble invitation to show me your love. Like, I just think vulnerability just gets God running towards us like crazy. And so to be able to say, okay, God, I actually need good male strength in my life that's not funky sexually, right? Like, let me just break this down for you. I need brothers, essentially, is what I'm saying, is I actually need the goodness of brothers in my life. And God, in his sweet way, has woven in, I mean, I have real brothers, one of whom's actually moved back to the States, but he's woven in other men, not to be my all in all, right? Not to be my husband, but to bring me aspects of good male strength that somehow woven into me sort of just gives me a little bit more of a spine. I don't know how else to say it. And that's one of the ways his redemption shows up in my life. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm going to open it up. If anyone, we've got a couple of minutes. If people have got questions about really anything that Connelly's said, or if you've read the book and you want to ask something else. Yeah, Matt, can you go to that little microphone over there, please? And just so then it gets recorded and we can hear it properly.
I was just wondering, where did the title come from?
Well, if you know anything about the publishing industry, it's hard to get your own title in there. And the Embraced by the Goodness of God in the Chaos of Life was more or less our subtitle originally. We wanted the title initially Exhale, because we felt like so many people were just hyper vigilantly driving forward. But I think some of our younger producers with Tyndale and Nafras, they're like, sounds tired. And I was like, oh, maybe we're tired. And they said, we need something a little more. And so we started playing around with words. And ultimately, I think we actually came out that they're right, that they were right, that these younger voices were right, that in the end, what we want is people to be able to, in a sense, stand and in spite of daunting contexts, stand and actually even be able to move forward in spite of daunting chaos, be it in their own lives or in the broader culture around us. And our hope is that that's what the book will call forth or maybe put into folks.
Yeah, thanks.
How did the experience of writing the book over 3 years change or evolve or develop your own, I guess, theology of singleness?
Oh, well. Well, one of the pieces I didn't read, just from a time standpoint, but was in a way connected to that. So I was just writing that part, right where I ended, I was writing when literally Paula went out to buy, I was down in North Carolina where Paula lives. She went out to buy us lunch. I was at her house and I saw my phone had been, the ringer had been turned off, and I turned on the message, and it was a message from my mother, which said, "Connally, come home. I think Daddy's gone." And it was actually turned out to be the case. My dad had had a heart attack out of the blue. And so began this repeat journey of going back at a sudden death, back to Charlottesville, etc. And I think that experience, Julie, combined with here I am supposed to be writing this book, and I've just written about the big eternal picture, and now, by golly, I've just written it, and now I've just gotten this news. And there was really this moment, I think, so that was summer of 16, where I was like, I now have a chance to begin to practice what I've just written about. And I think in that, it's not like it was a moment. I say that like that's a moment. It's not a moment. It's a way. It's a way over time. But I think that sort of decision of, I will actually now choose to ask God to help me to see life through this lens that I have just written about, began to trickle down into these areas, including singleness. If I had read the rest of it aloud, basically, and pardon my French, and I'll say this quickly, but so we live in a culture where orgasmic consummation is the highest good, right? I mean, that is, when you start to get down underneath of it, that is sort of the highest good. And I began to realize, I think I bought into that myself. As part of the singleness thing, like I'm sort of being cut out of, I mean, people who are married are like, I mean, yeah, but I think that is part of the air that we breathe. And I began to think, no, what if there really is this consummation, so to speak, that is the highest good that is still to come? And then I began to think, I mean, it began to, I can't explain it, but it's like it began to trickle into my being that I'm not actually losing out on something by being single if singleness is where God has me right now. And that, and this piece, it's slowly over the past 3 years, but really as a product of a lot of time before, it's actually discovering that fruitfulness, which is really what I'm after on life on this planet, can come married, it can come single, it can come single again, it can come married again, and that what the good news is doing is, on this planet, is fathering us and freeing us and enabling us to be fruitful. And I began this sort of slow, like, hey God, could you teach me what it is to be fruitful and abandoned to you, and that gets to look like what you want it to look like. And whenever I say these things, I'm reporting them like they were points in time, but in fact they're not. It's like slow, circling journey that ever deepens in my experiential conviction. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, thanks. I know, it's actually a lot, right? It's kind of intense, but the book's actually fun, and Paul and I are really fun. And we really are kind of fun. And
it is very fun.
And we've been friends for 20 years, and so I think there really is the fun of the give and the take between us and our friendship.
Yeah, totally. And it is fun, and there are these moments of, and you actually see hope, like kind of, you've sort of read the last part as this hope backwards, but you actually see hope all the way through it. So it's not like, oh, this is all terrible, but oh, don't worry, it's going to be fine in the end.
Yeah, no,
it's actually, it's this living in the story of this, of seeing those things back and forth, and
yeah,
it's fun.
Like there really is life to be had in the now. Back to your question, Matt, on the title. When we first turned in our proposal for the book, we had said something just in passing about being able to smile at the future, or good old classic Proverbs 31, laugh at the days to come. And I think that is one thing that Paula and I have experienced, that somehow it is still possible to laugh. Like my mom and I, So I've, for 2.5 years since I moved back to Charlotte, so I lived with my mom until most recently I bought a place. And I said to my mom, it was on the anniversary of my father's death. And we went through and we recounted, now this sounds depressing, but it actually wasn't. We recounted all the loss that had gone on, even besides the 3 major ones, but all the loss that had gone on, you know, with cancer in our family and brother and sister-in-law having to evacuate Lebanon in the back of a military chopper and all that intensity and stress and these kind of things. And I looked at my mom and I said, but somehow we can still laugh. And it was true. And I think when people have Paula and me come to speak in some strange way, I mean, I think we have good content. I think we have a robust theology teased through the reality of everyday life narratives. But really, I think what people like is they feel our vibe up front and they're like, wow, faith in God over time and friendship are really possible. And I think at the end of the day, that's probably where, if the book has any power, that's probably the power of it.
Okay, Amanda, go
Amanda,
for it.
that'll be-
Amanda's going to be our last one, and then I'm going to read one little section.
Thanks very much, Connally. You mentioned Charlottesville, you mentioned Montreat Presbyterian Heaven. Could you say a little bit more about the confronting racism and your relationship with your African American friend? Was that both sides became aware of? Yeah.
Yes. I could say so much. I'm conscious in my mind of the time. So I will say this, and then I would love to talk more about it. It's a major parallel track in my life, the questions of race and ethnicity, and particularly in my case, because of my background, the questions of black and white. Maria, the friend who I write about in the book, she actually passed away from pancreatic cancer. And though I have to say the last 6 months of our friendship were probably the most tender. They really were the most tender. But I've been involved for the previous 3 years on the National Cultural Development Leadership Team of the Navigators, which is attending to questions of ethnic diversity, not just black-white, but all aspects of that in the organization. And I'm convinced that the gospel's capacity to thread and then weave together, thread the questions of racial division and then weave together people across races. I mean, it's true in Canada, but we know it's true in a sort of really difficult, loud way in America, to thread and tie members of different ethnicities across the body of Christ together is actually the greatest witness to the power of Jesus Christ. And it is slow and it is messy. And sometimes I just think you just say, I'm going to commit forever. I'm just going to commit forever and pray that you get to see some fruit born in your lifetime. But Amanda, it's a much bigger question and I really appreciate it.
Okay, I'm going to just read, not to give the whole game away, but you need to read this book. You absolutely do. And hopefully the bits that didn't make sense is because you haven't read the book. So now you need to go and get the book from the Regent College bookstore. But let me leave you with this last paragraph toward the end of the book, which is a hopeful place for us to go on from. John of Patmos ends the book of Revelation with Jesus' testimony that he's coming soon. Truthfully, neither Paula nor I have any real idea of what soon means. But when we step back and look at where we've journeyed in our lives, and even in this book, we believe that the next stage of the journey will be worth the wait. We know that last mountain range opens up to panoramas beyond our wildest imaginations. So between here and there, we've grown to believe that singing, stretching out, surrendering fear again and again makes total sense as we journey. Maybe you've gotten glimpses of this as well. Maybe you even want to join us as we blend our voices with John of Patmos's. He ends his book of Revelation with the words that hundreds upon hundreds of thousands have earnestly prayed as they too have waited. Come, Lord Jesus. Meanwhile, as we wait, we know that there is much good work to do and many people to love. And though it's a bit daunting, I suspect it really might be a good idea to take that tango lesson. That's the end of the book. And the tango doesn't make sense if you haven't read it. So, Connally, thank you. Thanks for being honest and open with us in your book, but thanks for being honest and open with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
You can join me.